All right. So good morning, everybody. Sorry for tuning in a little late, but I had a little mail issue to access the link. So finally I'm there, and I'm glad to see that we're even actually more than we were last week. So I'm happy to see that. Just before we start, did everybody do their little homework and get prepared for today? I can have thumbs ups for those who did. All right. That's awesome. Cool. So let me start my PowerPoint. I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, host, which is, can you enable me to share my screen?
Yeah.
Because actually I think you're the only one who could do that. Oh yeah, cool.
Can you now? Okay.
Yeah, I can do that now. And I'm gonna put that in full screen. All right. So today's class or workshop, I'm still not sure how you call this, but is on land and agrarian reform, and we are going to look at some alternatives to the current agricultural economic model that we have. As I said last time, today will not be a lecture. It will be based on cooperative learning. So we will be each other's teachers in some way. So I expect to learn as much from you as you will learn from me today, plus maybe a little intro to get into the topic. But the show will really be yours today. So for those who weren't there last time, my name is Veronique, and I'm a student at Concordia University, as I told last time. I'm also a farmer and seed saver, and I thought today you'd like to see a picture of my last year's vegetable garden. It's kind of sideways, but it was to fit in the design, so you get an idea. We mostly cultivate on mulch, so that's why it's not like brown or black earth, but it's rather kind of pale brown. It's the straw that you see mostly. Before we start, maybe we can do a little round table to see how you're doing. If some people would like to tune in, and or you did that this morning when I was not there, that's possible too. So you don't have to do this again. I'd also like to know what are your expectations for today's class. So if there are some areas or some topics that I did not put on my planification and my planning, then maybe I can try to cover them if they're in your expectations. So we could go for a little round table if anybody wants to take the floor. I can stop sharing for a minute. I guess you're all feeling fine. Any expectations particular to today's class?
I can go. I'm expecting to teach you what I've learned about my topic, but then I'm hoping to hear your opinion on it, or places I've missed out on information.
Okay. I'll sure do that. And you had you had maybe the hardest one, the comments. So it will be a great discussion, I'm sure. All right. Anybody else would like to voice their expectations for today? Yeah, Eugene, go ahead. You're muted though, I can't hear you.
For me, I had the land bank.
Okay.
I tried to correct some information, and I compare also what I got on the website to how the land bank works in my country.
That will be really interesting. I'm glad you picked this topic. Anybody else wanted to voice their expectations or how they're doing? All right. So yeah, as I said, the floor will be yours, and as I said, I expect to learn as much from you as you will learn from me today. But for sure, I will not totally disappear after your presentation. So I'll be glad to host a discussion afterwards, and maybe to guide you to further readings if you liked it, or to enliven the discussion about that topic. So for sure, you'll get my comments on that. All right, or we'll be back to our PowerPoint. And if at some point you get fed up by PowerPoints, just let me know and I can go without them as well. And just as a side note, after today, if there are things you'd like to discuss or readings you'd like to be directed towards, you always have my email in the PowerPoints, and you can ask Claire and Mark to forward an email to me, but it's better if you go straight to it. And I'll be glad to answer you as soon as possible. All right. So come on, PowerPoint. All right. So just like last time, since you liked it, I propose you a poll everywhere where you can either text to this number, or you can go on the website. And I'd like to have your opinion before we start, since we are discussing agrarian reform. I'd like to know whether you think we need an agrarian reform or not. So I gave you 4 choices of answers. So maybe for you, like, no, we don't need a reform. Like what we have right now just works just fine. Or B, yes, we need something completely different and a very wide-ranging reform. Or C, you think we don't need a reform, but we have to have different alternatives going under the current system. Or D, we need a reform, but we need it to be diversified and adaptable. So if anybody is having an issue with Poll Everywhere, or if it's hard to get there, just let me know and I'll try to guide you. It's either by text or by the website. And if you did not text, I think it's leave that you text to Poll Everywhere. If you did not do that last time, then you're still on my survey here. And yeah, just remember there are no right or wrong answers, and there might be more than those 4 choices, but I don't judge them, and the answers are anonymous. So I just want to have an idea of how you feel about that.
I should let you know, when I go to the page, it says that there's no activity. I don't
Okay.
know.
I'll try to see what I can do with that. Okay. It should be going. I can try to go back on Poll Everywhere and maybe open it.
We also just lost your shared screen, or at least I did.
Yeah, because I'm going online just to open the survey back. I'll just log into my account to see if it works better. Just give me a sec. Okay, so I'll be back to screen sharing. Okay. So now does it work if you go on the website?
I still have the same message, but
That there is no activity?
it may be just me. There isn't a response on the poll, right? So maybe I'm just not.
What about others? Are you able to access the poll?
I can see mine.
Okay, because on my end, and what you see on the PowerPoint is the exact same thing. Like, I don't see how many people answered, but I just see the results. So if everybody answers the same thing, then I don't have an idea whether it's one person or like many people answering. But it seems so far, for those who were able to answer, your preference goes to the D answer, where you think we need a reform, but we don't need like one big reform that will fit everybody's or like every place's problems, but rather something that would be adaptable. Before we go further, would anybody want to express their thoughts on this before we move forward, or you'd like to keep it for the end? It's up to you. Okay, I see other answers here. All right, so no one wants to be vocal on this. That's fine. So
it's a little bit tricky. Just broadly generalizing socioeconomics and like the agroeconomic system. And I know this is the first class I've attended since I missed the last one. The general neoliberal sense that we have with the dominant land division and use being judged and developed by federal or national policy to then top-down manage what can be done in fields, and then that determines yields and things like that, is what I think we're getting at changing. But really looking at the change that's needed to either, because change itself is a function of the needs of the people deciding what they want. It's more so, it can go any way. If someone says they want to change the agricultural system to benefit them and their small group of people, it's totally different than an egalitarian system where it's trying to benefit multiple people. And in even benefiting multiple people, that could just be tyranny of the majority and have a huge climate and ecological impact that would be unforeseeable by the people trying to make the change happen, because they'd be simply looking to benefit themselves or their people throughout the change rather than actually be aware of all the impacts they're going to have and so on and so forth.
yeah, well, you have a very detailed analysis, and that's pretty much, I think, where we are heading today. And yes, maybe we can think about like a full-fledged agrarian reform that would like change the whole agroeconomic system altogether. And then that usually is kind of top bottom, from the top down rather than the bottom up. But we could ask, is that a good solution? Because then, as you said, we can go into something that would be violent to some people, or that would be disastrous in terms of maybe social or economic consequences or environmental consequences as well. So I'm not saying it's something we should throw out completely out the window, but it's something that we need to think really deeply about. Okay, well, thanks for your input here. It's very informative. Are we ready to move forward? Okay. So before we start with the presentations, I just wanted to do exactly what Jared just did, and talk a little about what we have as a mainstream agricultural economic model right now. This is often called agribusiness or industrial agriculture. Just so we know what we're talking about when we talk agribusiness, it's mostly everything that is related closely or remotely to agriculture. So yes, we're talking about farms, but we can talk about transformation plants, we can talk about fertilizer producers, we can talk about waste management. So on this graph, what you see are all the little tiny different aspects or different types of agribusiness that are all linked together, but that are all like pretty specialized in doing one thing. So this, as we will see, fits into the neoliberal logic of economics, and I'm getting to that in a moment. So I don't know how to say your name, sorry, but is it Jared or like Jared or?
Sorry, it's just Jared.
Jared?
Yeah.
Good, sorry. I had no idea, so I don't want to to kill your name or to butcher it. So, okay, so in what you were talking about, neoliberalism in agriculture, there are a couple of major trends, but mostly it's more and more about free trade, and I'm sure you've heard about this in the news lately. So it's the idea that we don't want protectionism or to protect our local assets, but we rather want to go to what is completely just under, which is comparative advantages. So the idea of comparative advantages if there is no barriers to trade between countries or areas or communities, then the way to make it in the economy is to be excellent in maximizing profit, but at one thing, to which maybe your soil or your community or your expertise fits best. So that would be to say, maybe here on my homestead, the ground was really good to have a vineyard. So in the comparative advantages idea, I would not have a homestead, but rather have like a full monoculture of vines that I would turn into grapes and then wine. And I would try to maximize my profit to that. And I would try to get over the competition of other wine producers. So it's not always a bad idea, but this becomes weird and goes counter to what we discussed last time with food sovereignty when it goes at a global scale. So imagine a country that would only grow lemons, for example, just because they have like the perfect ground to do it, or that's what they excel in doing. But then what if the global market for lemons is going down, or what if they deplete their soils because they always grow the same thing? Then they are not food sovereign, they are dependent on the others. And it's also a problem for sometimes dumping, but it's also a problem for diversifying the economy as well. So the idea of comparative advantages is really popular in neoliberal thinking, but it's also very tricky for like whole economies. Then comes the idea of maximizing profits for sure, and rationalizing production. So the idea is always to have the minimum inputs for the maximum outputs or the biggest profit. And the third column is really what is typical to neoliberal agriculture. The first is deregulations. So it's the idea to get rid of barriers that would slow down the production process, or that would be in the way of having like bigger production or more efficient production. And so we're talking about decreasing norms, for example, and decreasing all the regulations that would be around production or food safety, for example. And the last one goes a little against the regulations, but it's really central in the idea in industrial agriculture. It's about intellectual property rights. So it's all the idea of labeling genetically modified crops, for example, and it goes counter to the idea of deregulating, because we're adding a regulation and we're securing the property of something that should maybe not be owned, like life itself. But it's central to agribusiness as it is right now, since big seed companies or big petrochemical companies are making all their profits on their patents. So the genes of the crops, or a certain fertilizer mix that is patented, so nobody else can keep these seeds. They have to buy them year after year, for example. So the result of this is now is mostly less farmers, but bigger and more centralized and specialized farms. So you will see like big monocultures of one crop, or a big farm of just one sort of livestock. And so yeah, this comes with the reliance on monocultures and biotechnology. So all the machinery and all the chemical fertilizers that go in this, and the genetically modified crops as well. Is that fine so far? Okay. So we do see the shortcomings of this idea of agriculture, and I listed a couple of them, but I'm sure you can think about more. So the first one is the loss of biodiversity. Because mostly if we're only growing one crop in one area and we're trying to maximize its production, we're decreasing what diversity there could be on a farm or in a farm ecosystem or the surrounding ecosystem. Then of course this is linked to climate change as well, because we're not having the same diversity, but mostly because our reliance on fuels that goes into all of the machinery, that goes into the big production of livestock, that goes into the transportation of produce and animal products over big distances. So it's all having a big impact on climate change itself. Then we also talked about the loss of food sovereignty, the damages to soil and ecosystems that are more and more known, the dependence on oil, for sure. If we're all having, like, if there are mostly big farms that are not human scale anymore, we need tons of machineries and tractors. So we have a big dependence on oil, and a lot of fertilizers also based on petroleum at some point. Another consequence is farmers' precarity. So since the farms, well, this is not always the case. So some farmers or some farm operations can have like very huge profits, but others could have a very big difficulty to make ends meet if they have like very big farms that are only have a thin profit margin. So they always have to produce more year after year to be able to keep up with the growing scale of their farms. But that can lead to farmers' precarity. And the final issue that I listed is land grabbing. So the idea of like those bigger and bigger farms that are all centralized, then it makes less land available for other smaller farms or for communities around it. So land grabbing is mostly about farmland. So maybe what Eugene will talk to us later today will speak in some way to that issue of land grabbing. Okay, so far so good? Good. So I won't spend more time on depressing news about neoliberal agriculture, and I'd rather like to go into the alternatives that are possible to it. So my opinion to the first poll we did is really to have those many possibilities or many alternatives in and through the neoliberal agriculture. So we might not want a full-fledged agrarian reform that would overthrow everything, but we want to go step by step in many directions for getting a better agriculture, depending on where we live. So that's just my own opinion. Like, it doesn't have to be yours, but that's the way I'd like to direct the class today. So yeah, that's my take on it. Like, no one size fits all solution. So as Jared said, different communities and different ecosystems will not require the same solutions to their current problems. So they are in the best place to decide and to find out what is best for them. So what we'll end up with is rather a diversity of solutions that might be better adapted to each situation. But at the same time, I agree that we do need something that is strong enough to be a viable alternative to industrial agriculture and neoliberal agriculture. But That's just the mindset I have. But if you'd like to disagree at any point today, you can jump in and voice your own opinion on this. Right, so a first example that I did not listed in the possible alternatives and that you might have heard of, but maybe not, is the example of in Cuba, they have a certain type of urban agriculture that they call organoponico. And this is the example, the perfect example of a very local solution that they had to come up with after the oil crisis in the 1990s, after the USSR crashed or collapsed. They turned out to have, and they still had the embargo from the USA. So they did not have access to machinery anymore, and not to fertilizers, and not to oil anymore. So they had this very they had a nationalized agriculture that was specific, that was specialized in producing coffee, lemons, and sugarcane. So when you have those big nationalized monocultures, and that you don't have tractors, you don't have fuel, and you don't have fertilizers, you're in big trouble. So the organoponicos is one of the things they came up with to be able to feed themselves despite the embargo. So they actually, this model is made out of farmers cooperatives in the middle of cities, because that's where they can have the food directly without the need of fuel to carry it over long distances. And the idea of a cooperative was really new to Cuba before, because most things there are nationalized. So here the farmers are co-workers, but they are also the owners of what they produce. And because they were in the middle of cities, the soil was not necessarily good to grow in. So what they come up with is those raised beds, and these are clean ones, but sometimes there are like other things to make the sides of the beds that are not so nice. Sometimes it's bricks, and sometimes it's wood. It depends on what they have. And then they construct the soil over it, and what they have as a possibility there is that since it's very humid and hot, everything decomposes very quickly. So they actually use the residue of sugarcane producing, and they turn it into compost really rapidly, along with food scraps and the leftovers from the previous season. And they construct the soil with it. And these are actually diversified vegetable farms mostly. And then they have an agreement with the government where they can have a decent price for what they produce, and they can actually share the profits among the farmers in the cooperatives. So this was a pretty new system to Cuba, maybe 2 decades ago, but now it's getting more and more common throughout Cuba, and we can see how this model was really a local solution to a local problem. It can be brought brought overseas, but it's mostly it would need to be adaptable to work fine otherwise. Do you have any questions on this? Okay. And that would be my part here on community land trust, but maybe I'll go last because I would like to hear what others prepared. Or what would you prefer? Would you prefer me to present my stuff first so you have an idea, or would you rather go first and keep my part for the last? I don't mind. No opinions? Okay, well, I'll just present this as it's there. We are a little ahead of time, but mostly we want to keep maybe 5 to 7 minutes each for presentations. So we have the time to ask each other's questions at the end too. So the subject I picked up, that was the last subject that so far I think nobody was in charge of doing, was the community land trusts. So maybe some of you know what that is, maybe others don't. So a community land trust is not usually always tied to agriculture. It's the idea of having a pretty big patch of land that is held in trust by the community rather than owned by individuals or businesses. So how this works is that people create a nonprofit organization that will be the trust, and that will be the actual owner of that patch of land, and then they will lease or they will have an agreement between the owners of businesses or of houses or whatever installations on top of it, to keep the land affordable. And the trust and the nonprofit organization with it will actually decide what's happening with the land itself. So why it's interesting for agriculture is that it doesn't become like a patch of businesses that are owning the land and responding to neoliberal logics, but rather the whole community through the nonprofit organization and its elected members that take control of what's happening to the land and how it should be used. So it's a very different model here. I have a little diagram here. So this is for the more common housing land trust, but it works for farm land trust as well. So the land itself is held by the trust itself, that is the owner of the land. But then there is what they call permanent affordability, because the land trust makes a lease that is a lifetime lease or 99 years between the owners of the buildings or the businesses or the houses on the land and the trust itself. So for people, it's more affordable to access land or to access housing, depending on the land trust type. And it ensures that it will not be sold in the housing market or the land market. And then the residents or the workers, depending on the type of land trust, are actually owning the structures on top of it. So either the farm installations or the houses at a lower price than what it would cost them if they went through the market. Here's a little quote that I thought recaps the idea. So Hiller says, the land is never sold. It is held by the trust. Usually it's a tax exempt nonprofit committed to maintaining the land and ensuring that it is used for a designated purpose. For example, here, organic farming, and that the lessee makes his payments. So of course people still have to pay for their installations or the land in some ways, but it's really affordable, and it's at minimal cost of what it could cost them. So yeah, I think altogether that's the idea of land trust. I think it's more common in the States than it is here in Canada. There are initiatives here, however, to implement land trusts in different places. One of them is trying to be, well, some people are trying to implement one in the Hudson next to Montreal. And the idea is really to access a big patch of land that was previously owned by a farmer, like a big commercial farmer, but that is going to retirement, and who wanted to lease his land to the community. So the land trust here would actually be this nonprofit that would need to be implemented first, that would then acquire the land and hold it in trust and would afterwards lease those lifetime leases to different, maybe small farmers that would have like a small patch for vegetable farm that would be maybe intensive organic agriculture, something else. And the trust, what is interesting is that it's still owning the land in a communal way. So it's through democracy afterwards that people decide what they should do of the land. So if one of the farmers decided to turn to intensive non-organic agriculture, for example, or to monoculture, then it would have to go through the trust, and there would be deliberations as to how this could be made while retaining the initial or the current view of how the land should be used. So I can speak more about land trust, but I would really like to leave the floor up to you so we could all learn from what you prepared today. So I just put back the subjects here. It doesn't have to be in that order. We will go on a volunteer base, so whomever would like to go first can go first. I will stop sharing my screen, so if you have something you would like us to see, like a video or something, you can also share your screen. That will be possible. And so yeah, we're exactly on time. So if we can take 5-6 minutes each to present our part. Feel free to ask questions throughout as well. So either to me or to other people. All right. So who would like to go first and teach us what they learned this week?
I can go first.
Sure.
I don't have anything to like share to like the screens or anything. But so I had incredible edibles and gleaning as something that I needed to look up. And I had never heard of incredible edibles before, but it turns out the practice that it is being done at UNB where I did my degree. So what incredible edibles are, it started in 2008 in Tomorden, UK, about 15,000 people in that town, that city. And the initiative of an incredible edible are accessible vegetable gardens, street planters, food forests, edible restaurant terraces that are, just accessible to anybody. So you could be walking down the street, you see a cherry tomato growing in this planter, you can pick that and you can go on your way. So at UNB, they have planters around the university. I'm not sure how many there are, but they grow mint and cucumber and kale and lettuce. And you can just go at that and take it home. The other aspect that I looked up was gleaning. And that's not a word that I had ever heard of before. But a definition of it is to glean is to extract resources, and gleaning is the act of extracting leftover resources from a farm field. I think that wouldn't necessarily come into play in a small location like Hayes Farm because there's a lot of hands and eyes on the ground getting things out to give to people. But in a conventionally farmed field, there would be a lot of vegetables and crops left over that it's not in their best interest to go back and harvest those with their machines. So allowing people to go in and pick those vegetables for either a reduced price or for free is a good option. And then it says that this gleaning dates back hundreds of years to, let's see, it's a practice described in the Hebrew Bible that came as a legally enforcement entitlement of poor in a number of Christian kingdoms. So it was an inherent right to be able to go into the fields to collect the food that was still good, but nobody's going to pick. And that was a lot of words that I threw out at you, but that is incredible edibles and gleaning.
Yeah, I realize now that maybe I shouldn't have put those two words together, but they do have nice things in common. And maybe one aspect that we would like to think about is how actually this leaning idea is playing out with those neoliberal regulations around like what is property on farm and what would be stealing like their rights, because I know they do that for seeds. So if you are growing genetically modified corn and you want to keep your seeds for the next year, you can't, because the seed is patented. So I don't think they have the exact same set of regulations for the produce of the farm, but it might be interesting to see how it plays out. If it's rather if today gleaning is more like a guerrilla act, or it's more something we're entitled to do. And every now and then here in Saint Dominique, we have an onion and a carrot farm because we have like black earth. So it's in the idea of comparative advantages, that's what they grow. And every fall, there are like tons of leftover carrots and onions that are just like they didn't go through, they actually passed through the mesh or whatever was harvesting them. But it's left there. So I don't know. Could we go there and glean it? Could we organize like a community or like a gleaning trip there? I don't know. Like that would be interesting to see.
The only example that I have of gleaning, I guess, I know some folks that are from Florenceville, which is, you know, potato capital of the world. He had a big old potato field in his backyard, and once they were done with the tractors, they could go in and pick out all the leftover potatoes they wanted. I don't know if there were, I don't know, because they shared the property line, if they were allowed to go in for a special reason. But it does happen at least a little bit, I guess.
Cool. Anybody else had questions for Matthew?
I'll just say that there is a community group. I think it's Fredericton Food Rescue, I think is the name of it. And that's one of our field trips that's scheduled for the fall that hopefully will, or not fall, end of the summer, that hopefully we'll be able to go on. And there's a grower that Tabby worked with, Sunset UPIC. They do strawberries, blueberries, and raspberries, and I think some other things. But our cohort last year went and gleaned raspberries and blueberries at the end of the season, and so there's definitely some examples of that happening around here, and on smaller efforts too. I've heard of a few instances of small groups outside of that doing gleaning.
Pretty cool. I'm happy to learn that it's actually happening in your community. I know it's getting a bigger and bigger trend in Montreal, but sometimes it's nice to get out of the Montreal bubble too, to see what's happening out there. And maybe it's something that would be worth implementing in different communities, especially if we are discussing food security, for example. All right. Any more questions on that topic or things you'd like to voice? All right. Who would like to go next then?
I can go next. I have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to try and share my screen.
Sure. It's actually at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There is a green rectangle with an arrow. It's called Share Screen.
Okay. Maybe this will work. Maybe not. I don't know.
Okay. Can you actually click on the green bottom share screen at the bottom of your screen?
Yeah, it's letting me press that, but
yeah, and then you get to choose which window you want to share.
It's okay. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Beautiful.
So I've got community supported agriculture. Okay. So basically, it's a system that connects farmers and their consumers by allowing consumers to subscribe to their harvests. So basically, in other words, consumers support local farmers by buying part of the harvested crops. There are like variations of the harvested crops, the timeline and price of these programs depending on the places. Often subscribers receive like weekly boxes of produce for the available harvest seasons, and this produce can range from anything harvestable depending on the chosen farm, such as fruits, vegetables, or meat produce. Some farms may choose to have a collective program to harvest a wider range of produce, and Hayes Farm is an example because we provide a weekly CSA program throughout the summer and autumn seasons. I have a little bit of history. It began in South America in the 1980s with the Indian Line Farm in Massachusetts and Temple Wilton Community Farm in New Hampshire. I couldn't find any images, but in 1960s, Japan's, I'm probably going to say this wrong, Teikei model, which is spelled T-E-I-K-E-I, translates to partnership, and it was one of the first forms of a CSA system. It was started by a group of women who were driven by environmental issues and the distrust of quality in their food. But these two farms pictured were not influenced by Japan, and rather they were influenced by post-World War II Europe, which was influenced by an Australian philosopher named Rudolf Steiner, which Mark was talking about earlier. His concepts influenced biodynamic agricultural tradition, which is a system of sustainable farming that uses organic materials, views the farm as an ecosystem, and often bases its practices on lunar cycles. It places an emphasis on the fact that all living things are dependent on one another. So alongside this, one of his major concepts was producer-consumer association, or how their mutual interests link them. So if CSA is community supported, then the economic link between production and consumption is local or community. This little diagram shows economic, social, and environmental factors that play roles in sustainable agriculture and CSA. It relates to Steiner's concepts because economically, it financially benefits the community. Socially, it creates and strengthens community engagement. Environmentally, it reduces transport and emphasizes the importance of locally sourced resources. So the importance of CSA, other than like what I just said, I found this diagram which I think shows some great points on why community food systems are so important besides the examples I just gave. It firsthand emphasizes the importance of farmers and allows the community to connect with them in their food. Again, as I've said, it helps the environment by reducing transport to decrease pollution, as well to preserve the land and create a sense of community around it for future generations. It does not only create local jobs, but supports them. And lastly, it is a huge step towards food sovereignty as it educates one on the food system while providing accessible and available food for one's community. And then to finish up, I found some Canadian statistics by Dr. John Devlin and Meredith Davis in 2016 that I thought would be kind of cool to share to finish up. And they compare their findings to a study in 2011 based on the whole of like farmers, whether they're CSA or not. So they found in their study that the majority of CSA farmers were under 40, but in the 2011 study, only 9% of farm operators were under 40. So I guess it's kind of cool to see that like, it's kind of like younger farmers that are more into the CSA and the ideas are like changing. They found that those who relied on the farm for income was a little over half. They didn't really say like whether it was because they could not be supported by their farm, but they did say that many of the people that had another job was agricultural related. This diagram from their study shows that like more often than not, only one single CSA program, but it can range up to like 20 farms, which I think is crazy. And then this diagram shows how like CSA is very organic, and like a lot of farmers who participate follow different organic practices. So there's like some listed on the side. I won't really say them all, but like you can see that. And some statistics that I thought to share that I didn't put up here was that the average member households was 100, and the average weekly share price was $26. And that's all I have to say about CSA. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tabby. That was really awesome presentation.
I don't know how to stop this.
At the top, yeah, stop sharing. Great. Well, that was a really condensed and complete presentation. And I loved your PowerPoint. I loved your statistics also, sorry. And I think you drew a pretty exhaustive picture of what CSA is. And maybe your example of like 20 farms baskets that you find so crazy. We do have one in the Montreal region, actually. And the goal of this is to actually provide year-round vegetable baskets. So this is why they have to have many different people or farmers participating in the basket, because in the winter, like there is garlic, there are squash, there are like greenhouse greens, so they're all done by different farmers. But year-round vegetable baskets can also be done by one farm, and I know other examples of this, but it's definitely harder to have a year-round basket production. So it definitely exists. All right, any questions for Tabby or the subject? Well, congrats once again. That was really great. Anybody would like to go afterwards? Otherwise, I'll just pick up someone.
Excuse me, maybe this is Siring. So we have a slight change in the presentation here now. Since Eugene had to leave with some emergency call, so I am now, jumping in.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah, so maybe I can start. I will just try to use his PowerPoint, and I don't know. I mean, I hope I will be able to, explain what he meant. But anyways, and maybe you might miss the Congo example, but you can definitely have a Bhutan example. So, yeah.
Great. Do you know how to share a screen?
Oh yes, yeah. So actually, this is what Eugene has created, and he has some, I think he has done some research on the websites, and this is what he has done. So actually, what is land bank? I'll try to read what's on the screen. He mentioned that the land bank is a public entities. It can be non-profit or a governmental entities, and it is created basically to hold efficiently hold, manage, and develop tax foreclosed properties. And it's mostly specialized in the conversion of back-end or abandoned or foreclosed properties into a productive use. And then land banks are granted special powers by state enabling legislation. The power included the ability to remove legal and financial barriers, such as the delinquent property taxes that often render vacant and abandoned properties inaccessible or unattractive to the private market. Land banks acquire properties through different means, but the most common pipeline is, I think, through the property tax foreclosure systems. Can you see the screen, by the way? Oh, okay. And he also mentioned that it can also act as a tool for planning long-term community developments, and successful land bank programs vitalizing blighted neighborhoods and direct reinvestments back into the neighborhoods to support the long-term community visions. So why have a land bank? Land bank holds and maintains land temporarily under a responsible owner until a responsible owner is appropriately identified, and land bank improves existing land use practices. Land bank enhances liability of the communities and support local communities development, because vacant and abandoned land does not produce sufficient property tax revenue and impedes the ability to sustain its operation, programs and services, and abandoned land discouraging property ownerships. What are the benefits from the land bank? It provides tools to quickly turn these tax reverted properties back into the usable parcels that are reinvested in the community's long-term vision for its neighborhoods. Land bank program act as an economic and community development tool to revitalize blighted neighborhoods and business districts. Land banks can benefit urban schools, improve tax revenues, expand housing opportunities, remove public nuisance, assist in the crime prevention, and promote economic development. And it can also help local authorities by avoiding cost burden of property maintenance, public safety, increase revenue because the new property owners pay taxes on the property, provide more opportunities for the affordable housing. It discourages criminal activities, thereby benefiting public safeties and decreasing the cost burden on the local policies and fire departments. It increases more services and amenities to the community, which boosts local economic activities. I think he has referred to these two websites. So since I don't have the example from Congo, I was trying to Google what is like a similar land bank that is practiced in Bhutan. So I just came through that the government of Bhutan has something similar called users' right certificates. I think that is a land form which is expected to facilitate the allotment of state lands for agriculture and economic purpose in rural areas. I think here actually the state is trying to allocate the lands, the state lands to the rural communities or to the youth people, who has no jobs, who are unemployed. I think they try to give it to them and then try to it's some sort of a lease that they can have till 30 years, and then they can do some productive farming or utilize for some economic productivity and generate some income. So I think basically they only give about 30 years, and then if the person who is leasing the land, if they cannot utilize that one, they can, the state immediately takes back and then give it to someone else who is capable of using it. So I think the main focus is to to give unemployed youths opportunity to use the land. I think that's all I have. So if you have any questions, maybe I can try to explain.
Well, good. Thank you, Jering. And that was pretty interesting. Maybe the land banks is what the most technical thing I've put in the this week's subjects. But the main focus of land banks, at least here in Quebec, is to actually make land accessible to young farmers and to smaller farms, and to avoid having agricultural land that would just go unused. And it's maybe one of the ways to fight land grabbing issues. So you can.
Oh, yeah, I just forgot to mention one thing. I think in Bhutan, the government actually they try to control the land grabbing issues by restricting to a 25 acres limit. So I think the citizens are allowed only about 25 acres to have the land, and then if they have more than that, then it has to go back to the state. So I think this is some kind of a control that they have created.
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty interesting measure. I don't think we have that here in Canada, but maybe others know if we have such regulations against like very like huge farmland being owned by one person or one business. So far as I know, it doesn't exist, but it might. Okay. Anybody had questions for Turing on that, on land banks? Okay, so far so good. So who would like to go next? All right, so I'll pick someone up, and maybe we'll try to keep them presentations a little shorter so we can have time to discuss at the end. What about Hannah? Do you want to go?
I can go. I have a PowerPoint, so but I've never shared my screen before, so I'm going to try this.
Okay.
Can you see it? Okay. Okay, so I did mine on commons as like an alternative option for an agriculture economic model. And this is a really brief overview of it because I've like found so much on it. You could write like a whole essay or a thesis on it. So it's a very brief introduction. So to start, I'm going to talk about what commons are, and I'm going to talk about the tragedy of the commons because that's kind of like the opposite of what we're talking about. So the commons is a new way to express a very old idea that some forms of wealth belong to all of us, and that these community resources must be actively protected and managed for the good of all. So basically, it's like air, water, earth. So those are like resources we all share in common, and that they should be preserved for the benefit of all. And there's also like social creations such as like libraries and public spaces and like scientific research that is supposedly supposed to be shared for the good of all. More like brief introduction is commons are shared resources in which each stakeholder has an equal interest, and it's managed for individual and collective benefit. And it's short for common pool resources, common property resources, or common property regimes. So the commons movement is Julie Majot. She runs like the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and she calls the commons movement an option as like a countervailing vision and force for change. And I have a quote here. The commons movement is, some speak of it as an emerging commons paradigm, as a new way of looking at the world, one that opens up the competitive, mechanistic, profit-centric mindset that has ruled Western civilization since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, with a more humanistic, environmentally aware, and holistic worldview. So it's basically a growing social movement, and it like keeps the market and government sectors in check because it's like shared resources and like a common interest. So to back up a bit, the tragedy of the commons is like it first popularized the term the commons, and so it was written in 1968 by an ecologist named Garrett Harding, and basically he was talking about shared resources and how humans are inherently selfish, and that would lead to, the tragedy would be human overpopulation and overexploitation of common resources, which would lead to ecological disaster. And he suggested solutions would be privatization and state-controlled resources, which a lot of people disagreed with. So my next two slides will be talking about the two different approaches in response to the tragedy of the commons and how they disagreed with him. So the institutionalist approach accepts that people are in competition for scarce resources, but it does not believe in the neoclassical assumption that people are perfectly rational in making decisions. And at first I was like, what? But it's because they believe that they lack the proper information or full information to make a decision. So they need institutions to educate and regulate economic exchange. And so they believe a third way to deal with the tragedy of the commons or issues with common resources is to have collective governance by the people who actually use and depend on the resource, which I think is a pretty smart and like common sense idea to do. And so the second approach is called the alter-globalizationist approach, and it's not really anti-globalization because they say they're not against like the increasing interconnectedness between the world, but they're more against like the capitalist ways that lead to like within globalization that lead to suffering and like environmental disaster and inequality. And so they suggest, like in contrast to the first two that I've talked about, they suggest reclaiming or creating commons instead of managing like the shared resource, which I thought was very interesting. And I think I agree with that one more. And then my last slide is relating like the commons to agriculture. And it's like they want to transform the agriculture system into more of a commons-based system. So like shared resources and like reducing the knowledge barriers so more people have the same knowledge. And I also think it has to do with like patented seeds and like the Monsanto issue and like giving people more access to things that they deserve to be like collective benefit for everyone. And so the commons movement is really a corrective to the privatization of public assets. And just in general, it'll create a more open, adaptive, and resilient food system. And yeah, that's it.
Wow. Great job once again. That was not an easy subject to cover, and kudos to you. I'm really impressed by your presentation. What did others think about the commons?
I just have a comment. So the tragedy of the commons is something that is is introduced in the degree that I took. They put it in like year one, and talking to the professor that is kind of like the leader of like the social side, he realized that using the tragedy of the commons as an example completely backfired because he had a lot of students believing, well, people are terrible, they're going to ruin it, there's no point in doing this. So they kind of had to like reanalyze how they kind of approach the topic. But no, it's very important. Well done, Hannah. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can chime in a little since my background is in anthropology, and maybe anthropology has something interesting to say about the commons. But this idea of the tragedy of the commons is really based on a liberal ethics that is mostly linked with the Western world, because there exists and there existed tons of other cultures that were really good at preserving the commons, and that can have manage things that belong to everybody without depleting it. So where that thinker said that the commons would just lead to depletion and ecological loss, well, this is in a certain mindset where everybody is trying to make like the most profit or the most out of the commons, which might not be the mindset of all populations on Earth. And to put the tragedy of the commons as a fatality is only one way of seeing how humans are, and it's definitely not the only way, for sure. All right, so I won't say more because I want to keep time for the others to tell us what they learned this week. But great job, and I don't have much more to say on your topic without spending a whole lecture on this, so we'll leave the floor for the others. So, do I pick up someone? Yeah? Okay, let's go with Sierra.
Okay. I did my PowerPoint presentation on my phone, so it's kind of junky. But let's figure this out. Is it working? No?
Not yet. Did you click on share screen?
Yeah.
Did you choose your screen?
Microsoft PowerPoint.
And then you have to click on share at the bottom right.
Okay.
Then you should get there.
What is going on? Maybe if I try the desktop.
Okay. Otherwise, can you send it to me? And I'll broadcast it for you, and in the meanwhile, somebody else can go. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so I'll write my email in the chat in case you don't see it. All right, so you can send it to me at this email, and I'll open it and broadcast it for you. And in the meanwhile, we will go with Louis Xavier.
All right. Well, I don't have any PowerPoint, but it's pretty simple. The subject I have was a collective garden. So basically, collective garden is a movement that, like, an amount of people gathers together to, like, all have the same like power of what they want to do with, like, the garden they want to do. Like, example, we have AS farm. So basically, like, example, there's like 10 people. So all are all equal, and they will choose together what they want to do with the farm, and they will share it, and they will share the work, and they will share the benefits or the vegetables or whatever they produce. So basically, it's like a kind of community stuff, but it's really different than the community garden. So it's not the same thing. So yeah, I saw some movement in Montreal. Like, there's a lot of collective, not a lot, but there's some collective garden there in Montreal. So it's really nice to see like that, like the kind of cities where you don't really have land that have those kind of things going on. So I guess it's more like a thing that started in the cities, because we don't really have access to lands on the cities, so it's easier to gather together for a land. Yeah. Any questions?
Well, thanks, Louis Xavier. And maybe to explain in a clearer way the difference between community gardens and collective gardens. In community gardens, it's like a garden patch that is divided into like squares, where each person has its own square, and they do whatever they want on that square, and they manage only their own square, and then the next square belongs to like the neighbors, and so it's a collective plot, but each person only manages their own little square. Whereas a collective garden is to have the same plot, but to work all together into one unified garden and to share the outputs of it. So it's mostly something that is tied to, as you said, urban agriculture. But it can work really well in rural areas as well. So maybe through a land bank or a community land trust, that could be a model that would be interesting to work together as a community and share the outputs of it. So yeah. Any questions on that topic? Was this something you knew before?
No.
No? Okay. So it's something new to you. That's pretty good. Any questions, or we go to Sierra's presentation? Okay, so I received your PowerPoint and I'm gonna share it. So are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, wait a sec. This, and then, all right. And just let me know when you want me to click.
All right. So mine was on local exchange trading systems. LETS for short. You can click it. Go ahead. Is it clicking?
Okay. Does it work?
It's still on the same first slide.
Is it?
Yeah, on mine anyway.
That's weird. What about others?
We don't see presentation mode. We see like actual PowerPoint.
Okay. Just wait a second then. I'll try it again.
Okay.
Now, does it work?
Oh yeah, it's on the next slide. Okay, so imagine a non-monetary currency in today's world. Go ahead. You can click it.
Yep.
Michael Linton had developed the system as such. He developed the local exchange trading system, and it was originated in BC in 1983. He designed it so members could manage an alternate currency system to that of the federal government's. Okay, next slide. The central idea around LESS is to allow its members to participate in the exchange of goods and services amongst others in the group, all the while building a sense of community for its members. Next. What makes it a great system? It builds community, people are valued, allow members to participate and contribute in local economy, even if they lack the traditional currency. Members help each other out, goods and services exchanged, contribute to a better quality of life for all members. They get to know each other. Communities can benefit from more connections and interactions amongst its members. Financially beneficial. The value of goods and services is based on time and labor hours. It depends on where it's organized, like whoever develops the organization in their community kind of develops the value. Like some people use unit of time, some people use credit, people use green dollars. Participating in LETS can reduce the use of conventional money and make your cash go further. In other words, tax done through LETS allows for that value of money to be saved or invested in something more costly, for example. And it shifts your mind. This type of system shifts your focus from federal government to the people and community by not using federal currency and instead using the skills and other people's skills, using your skills and other people's. An example of this would be Mary wants her house painted and John accepts a job. When John completes it, his account is accredited with the appropriate value from Mary's account. John can then use those green dollars somewhere else. Conclusion, this kind of system can help build communities of people who are connected, who have found their own valuable skills they can contribute, and allows members to shift from relying on the federal government to resource and people power within the community. That's it.
All right, thank you. That was pretty exhaustive as well. So again, I'd like to ask, like, how many people knew about LETS before? None. Okay. So, and it's nice to know that it was born in Canada. Maybe an example of this that is close to you, or like closer to you than I am, is the economy of $50 in Gaspésie, Quebec. So a bunch of people there, and it's spreading, started to cut like $5 and $10 and anyway, $20 bills in half. So rather than paying in like with a $10 bill, you would pay with like a $5 bill that is half a $10 bill. And because this money is cut, you can't actually use it outside this exchange system that is local. And there are a lot of interesting stories about that, because people are actually scared to cut their bills first, but it works well. And by doing that, you secure that your economy is local. And as you said, Sierra, that people get to give the best of their skills to others, and to mutually help each other out. So it could be interesting to tie agriculture into that as well. So it's more about an economic system, but it can work through agriculture systems as well. All right, and last but not least, we have Aldia. The floor is yours.
I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'll just read my notes that I made. So I had farmers cooperatives, and I wanted to just define cooperatives first because I didn't actually know a definition, which is it's an autonomous association of people who unite voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. And basically the central idea is benefit maximization over profit maximization. And farmer cooperatives specifically would be an organization of farmers that come together for marketing their products or buying supplies. So those are the two kind of main types of cooperatives would be supply cooperatives or marketing cooperatives, and those can also exist together within a single cooperative. And then there can also be like subtypes below that. So within supply cooperatives, for it would be supplies for production, and it could be specific to land ownership cooperatives or maybe machinery cooperatives. So a cooperative will get together and buy machinery that they all need to run their farms. Often farmers cooperatives benefit small producers more because they can pool their assets and then overcome market barriers for things that they couldn't usually get. It also empowers them to participate in decision making and take ownership over how they run their farm, and gives them more buying power when they band together. Reading, the only drawback I came across was this one specific cooperative I found in southern Maine that stated that the one thing was that collective decision making can be really hard, and sometimes it takes them a while to come to a consensus on how they're going to move forward, and that can stall innovation somewhat, but that was the only one specific case.
Yeah, well, that comes with real democracy in all cases. Maybe another type of cooperative you'd like to look into is producer cooperatives. And that's maybe one of the types that is well known in Quebec, at least, where instead of having like one farmer or one family starting a CSA farm, for example, there could be like 5 young farmers building a cooperative together. So the 5 of them are co-owners of the cooperative, and their main goal through that is to produce food and to maximize the benefits, as you said. So it's a different business model, but the producer cooperative definitely exists and is interesting in agriculture, especially when we're talking about like bigger farms that would be hard for young farmers to start by themselves. By teaming together, they can pool their resources together, as you said, and they can actually be more efficient at farm work, or they could share expertise depending on how they organize themselves.
Oh yeah, that was one thing I forgot to mention, that it also is a huge benefit in terms of like knowledge exchange and the social aspect of it in farming today that has kind of disappeared a little bit, and so the social ties is also a big thing, part of cooperative.
All right, so we went over a little, we did go over, but all in all, thank you all for your presentations. I hope you learned a lot from each other. I did, and I want to say you all did a great job at presenting those subjects. I hope it gives you an idea of the range of alternatives that there are to the current agricultural economic system. But of course, this is not an exhaustive list. Again, like there are tons of other alternatives and other models that we might want to look into. For the last minutes, I'll share the end of my PowerPoint. If I can put it at the right place. I had a quick question for you. If you're so close to Paul Everywhere, so I'd like to know, in all the alternatives that we presented today, or the models that we presented, which one is your favorite, or which one made you more curious and want to learn more about it, or which one was more exciting to you? So again, this is not voting for your favorite presentation. It's more, we're more talking about the models themselves. So again, let me know if Paul Everywhere doesn't work for you.
So I can't vote, it won't work, but I would vote for this cutting money in half.
The local exchange trading systems. So
Yeah.
that's just one example. They
Yeah.
came with half money. I can try to find some sources to this and send them to Mark so he can send them to you afterwards.
I did Google it really fast. Apparently they've been doing it for 5 years now. They call it the demi.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, demi means half in French.
Okay,
So.
of course.
Yeah, I actually don't have any scholarly or like news sources for you because I got to know the system through a conference. So it's mostly oral on my side, but I can definitely look more into that and send you more resources for it. Incredible Edibles and Gleaning is definitely worth looking at. They're also getting more and more popular. So yeah, I see the Let's are getting pretty popular today. Thank you for that. Do you need more time to vote? Co-op farms, farmer cooperatives. We're getting more and more answers. I did not know that the local exchange trading systems would be so popular today. It's always a surprise to see what people learn that is new to them or not. All right. So I know we are out of time mostly, but if quickly you had another alternative or another model you'd like to point out to us or to discuss, you can also just raise your hand and go ahead in talking about another alternative. Because as I said, the list is not exhaustive, so there might be something we totally missed out. There are things we missed out. But as an introduction, I think so far we're fine. So for the 2 minutes remaining, the floor is yours for questions, either to me or to your fellow teachers and learners. So questions on anything we saw so far, or comments you had on what we talked about today? I can stop sharing my screen too, so I can see you. All right.
Well, for comments, I mean, I really learned a lot of things today, and I really like the subject of Sarah and Aldea. It was really cool to learn about those, and all the other one, but those two were like my favorite.
Thanks for your input.
I just wanted to make a comment about my own. I guess I kind of do this for my brother because, like, I have 3 kids and he has 3 kids. So, like, when we need babysitters, we don't really want to pay someone to watch all our kids. So we'll kind of like exchange between ourselves, like our time or whatever. So that's kind of like on a smaller scale, I guess.
Yeah, well, actually, I'd like to introduce this wonderful book, which is called Take Back the Economy. And it's signed by G.K. Gibson Graham. They are actually two ladies rather than one, but when they write, they kind of create a new person. And their whole book is about rethinking the economy as to exactly what you said, Sierra, about what are the other things that we do that are part of the economy but that are not monetized. So exchanging, like gift giving is part of the economy, exchanging services is part of the economy, caring for others, for the elderly, for children, is also part of the economy. So it doesn't mean that because there's not a price or a wage or attached to it that it's not part of the economy. So their vision is to really rethink what is the economy and how we can reimagine our economic system to be more fair, or to live more balanced lives, for example. Because if we consider a job or the economy as only that for which we are paid, then only a tiny part of what we do is paid work, is work, and we can end up being totally overworked because we do all those other things that are not monetized. So caring for other people, producing food, or cooking food for the family, or providing services for other people. So it's, if ever you'd like to look into that, I think there is an online version that is free. I would have to look into that, but this is definitely a very interesting reading for everything we talked about today. And the authors are also feminists, so they have all this ethics of care that is behind their writing. So it's a really interesting discussion to have. All right. Other questions, comments, discussions? How was your experience of cooperative learning today? Did you enjoy it? Cool. And I'm really glad that you liked it and that you really did a great job, because when I tried in class with like CEGEP students, often they're anxious because they're like, well, I don't know, this other person might be crap as a teacher and like I won't learn or whatever. But once you try it, like you get to understand that everybody has something to share, and that by learning together, we can have like a broader perspective on a certain subject. Like this week, it would have been hard for me to cover all those subjects, for example, without being boring or sending you too much information, or not always being caught in my own mindset. So by pooling our teacher skills together and our research skills together, we get to have this broad panorama of different alternatives and different mindsets. And of course, if we can discuss more about this, then it's even more enriching. All right, so it's 10 for me. It's 11 for you. I know that the class is over, so if you want to go to your other occupations or other parts of the economy you have to work on, you can go. Otherwise, I can hang out there for a couple of minutes if you'd like to talk more. It's really up to you.
Merci encore, Veronique. And I think we try and, as difficult as it is right now, having everybody spread out on farm.
Okay, I didn't quite hear what you were saying.
I'm muted, but can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Just having some feedback issues in the farmhouse. As difficult as it is to kind of carry on our discussions from our online and morning classes onto the farm, because we are having to be spread out on farm, it's been a bit tricky. But I think this, at least from my perspective, I mean, there's everything that's being taught and talked about in our classes. There's so much more conversation that can be had about it. But I think this one especially is so interesting, and I hope there's more conversation that happens kind of around these different ideas, because Hayes Farm in itself is also kind of an alternative model, being a community farm, and the way that we market and sell the products that we grow, that you guys grow. And I still feel like Hayes Farm is very much in its infancy. Like, this is our 3rd year of our programming, and we've been working on the project for about 5 years now, but it still feels like there's so many different things for us to learn and explore, and like what direction we're going to end up going in is still very malleable. So everybody that's involved in the farm in whatever capacity definitely has input into that. So I hope the conversations continue.
Well, thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your input today, for the energy you put into preparing yourself and presenting to others. It's also good practice. I hope these conversations will continue, as you said, Claire. That will be it for me right now. But of course, feel free to email me anytime, and I can guide you through readings or whatever, or through questions you might have. So on my side, that will be it for today. Round of applause for everybody, maybe, who presented. As I said, you all did a great job, and I was thrilled to learn all what you prepared for us. So I hope your conversations and discussions carry on the farm and in all your social circles. Sorry, and I wish you a very nice day to all of you.
Thanks. Have a good one.